This is the story of a story. In life, we tell stories about what happened to us, who we met, what was said, what our feelings were. Mothers tell stories to their children. Dads tell stories to their wives. We sit in the silence of our bedrooms and tell stories to ourselves. Writers tell stories for a living. Therapists listen to stories all day. Politicians hire experts to tell stories on their behalf. So, in life, we're surrounded by stories. We're so used to stories we hardly think about them, except when they're so absurd we laugh, or so terrible they leave a scar inside. But stories are strange creatures, saying one thing, hiding another. And since we all tell stories all the time, perhaps it's a good idea to look a story right in the face and see what happens. So, here's a little story. It's late afternoon. 3 men and 2 women are standing on a street talking. After a few minutes, the 2 women shake hands with the men and leave. The 3 men stand for a moment, then 2 of the men walk into a lane and stop. One leans against the wall. The other stands looking at him for a moment, then leans over and kisses him on the face. A moment later, the 3rd man approaches. The man who is kissing drops to the ground with his head bowed. The man who was kissed closes his eyes and leans his head against the wall. The 3rd man walks between the 2 men. He places his hand on the sitting man's shoulder, and he touches the face of the man standing against the wall. Then he walks up the lane and disappears. This is the little story. It could have been an event seen from across the street. It could be part of a detective novel. It could be stage directions for a play or a movie. It could be someone's memory of an important moment in their lives. It could be a dream. It could be an image in the mind of a poet who is trying to write a poem. Whatever it is, it's the narrative of an event. It's a story. But we really don't know what it means. The odd thing about stories, as writers know, as dreamers know, as therapists know, is that they conceal as much as they reveal. Present in every story is an unexpressed dimension, a mysterious other from which the story springs, but which is not expressed in the story itself. What is this other? It's impossible to say. We may glimpse it when we realize that what we just said isn't quite what we meant, and that no matter how many times we rephrase things, we never get it entirely right. We may glimpse it when the mere shape and rhythm of a story suggests something else is going on, or when we sense something's missing. But what avoids us, what hides from us, is not just some political subtext, not some unconscious meddling, but rather something truly other. T.S. Eliot referred to it as the still point, the place of full meaning, of no meaning, from which all partial meaning flows. Feeling the presence and the absence of the mysterious other is going to take some time. So let's try to look for some meaning in the story. Let's go back to the laneway, turn a corner, and sit in a cafe with a private detective who's having a coffee, thinking about something, and watching 5 people standing on the street. Let's listen in. It was late afternoon, and as I sat drinking a coffee in a cafe, I saw 2 women and 3 men walk down the street and stop right next to where I was sitting. They were all in their 40s or 50s, casually dressed in a drab sort of way. They were agitated about something, with frustrated expressions and frowns. Maybe they couldn't agree on a tea time for their golf game. Maybe they couldn't figure out the meaning of life. From where I sat, it was hard to tell. Finally, one of the women pursed her lips into a grim mockery of a smile and shook hands with the others, then hooked her arm into the other woman's arm and led her away. The three men just stood there like they didn't know what to do. One of them looked around, taking in the cars, the people, the cafes, the boutiques, the cobblestone laneway right in front of them that led to another street. Then the other two men began walking into the laneway and stopped. I could see them from where I sat. One guy, the taller, looked about 50, leaned against the wall that lined the lane. The other guy, shorter, same age, just stood there looking at him. The third guy was still standing on the sidewalk. Now he seemed to be looking in my direction. I kept on watching them because they didn't fit the typical Yorkville stereotype. Not rich, not smug, no blank faces, no fashionable clothes, out of sync. I guess that's what drew my eye to them. I sipped my coffee. Then very slowly, the shorter man leaned over and kissed the tall man on the cheek. The tall man didn't respond. He just stood there, frozen in time. It might have looked like a gay scene, but I could tell it wasn't. Suddenly, the third man walked into the laneway and stopped right between them. The shorter man seemed embarrassed and sank down. The third man put his hand on the short man's shoulder, and with his other hand touched the cheek of the tall man. Then he walked up the laneway and disappeared. I put change on the table and got up. By the time I got outside, the men in the laneway had gone. I could have looked for them, but I had other things on my mind. Right now, at this very moment, we could stop what we're doing and take a minute to look around the room we're in, look outside, and maybe see such a scene. Or we could take a minute and make a scene happen ourselves. One of us could suddenly get up and leave, taking another with her. One of us could suddenly get up and kiss another man. It could happen. It does happen. Would we know why? Discussions do fail. People do leave. People do kiss. Why this happens is the great mystery. In spite of the stories they tell themselves, or we tell ourselves, all meaning is invented. Things just happen, and then we tell stories. Imagine for a moment you're a Freudian or Jungian analyst, or perhaps a psychotherapist, and your client walks into the room and sits down. Your client is about 50, male, intelligent, introspective, somewhat drably dressed. You ask how he is, and he says he had a curious dream. You ask to hear it. So he recounts this dream. I'm standing with 4 other people in Yorkville, 2 men and 2 women. I don't know any of them personally, but I'm part of a group that has to decide something. Everyone is very intelligent, very well educated. The 2 women are in their late 40s and are maybe professors or psychologists. The 2 men are in their late 50s and look like artists or poets, or maybe screenwriters. Everyone is sensitive and refined. But we can't come to an agreement about whatever it is we have to figure out, and everyone is getting pretty frustrated. It's like everyone respects and trusts the others, but our best intentions are going nowhere. So the women decide to quit and leave. This leaves me and the other 2 men. I look at their faces. Both faces are old and handsome, but tired, as though tired of life. Their eyes are sad, and they stand there barely moving. I don't know what to do, so I just look around for a minute. Then the two men start walking up a laneway that leads from Cumberland to Yorkville. Then they stop. One man, the taller, leans against a wall. The other man turns to face him. The tall man looks as though he's about to weep with the frustration of knowing so much and being able to do so little. Then the other man very gently leans over and kisses him on the cheek. I am greatly moved by this gesture. I am overwhelmed. For me, it's as though the short man is telling the tall man, it's okay to weep at the futility of life. I feel this futility myself, and I admire the kiss as a human recognition, a tenderness. I decide to approach them. But as I do, the short man is embarrassed at having been seen and slumps down. I walk up to them and get between them. I gently put my hand on the short man's shoulder, and I gently caress the face of the tall man, who has his eyes closed. Then I walk away, leaving them to their sadness and their silence. You, as an analyst, are now faced with this dream narrative. What do you make of it? The word analysis comes from the Greek analusis, which means to loosen up or to break up. So you, as an analyst, have to somehow loosen up this narrative. Loosen it up because the apparent meaning, which the dream narrative has just given you, is insufficient. You have to break it up so the real meaning falls out for the client, and falls out for you. This is exciting but dangerous ground. You don't want to put your interpretation into it, but you have to get the story reshaped somehow. But you're trained for this. You know that the dream narrative was constructed by your client's unconscious. You know that the unconscious uses images and symbols to tell a deep and meaningful story. So, in collaboration with your client, you walk step by step through the dream, looking at every image, every person, every movement, every feeling, every association. Finally, perhaps after 1 or 2 sessions, you've loosened the dream narrative enough, and what falls out is this. You're at a passage in your life, but it seems you're uncertain about yourself. You can't decide what to do with your feminine, creative impulses and your masculine, practical impulses. You can't figure out how to make them work together. And since you fail to figure things out, you decide to abandon your feminine impulses and go with your masculine impulses. This leaves you in a state of pragmatism, without your creative will, waiting to react to what happens. Your masculine side feels the loss of your feminine side. It's immobilized, feeling that any action it might take is meaningless. So it can't take the passage. It can't act without the meaning that the feminine creative force brings. Then you acknowledge all this by gently caressing the men, and you're able to complete the passage. This analysis of the dream narrative rests on several assumptions. It assumes that the dream is symbolic and that the people, the actions, the places are symbols of something else, something active in the dreamer's unconscious. It assumes that the actions in the dream reveal unconscious motives and point to decisions the dreamer is making unawares. The interpretation may be satisfying to the client, who may feel he has a better understanding of himself. It may also be satisfying to the analyst, who may feel he has helped the client get past the apparent meaning of the dream and penetrate to the latent or hidden meaning of the dream. The analyst may feel that he or she has shaken out the mysterious other hidden in the narrative. Not so. Another word for analysis is deconstruction. Deconstruction is taking apart a narrative to reveal the hidden assumptions that underlie it. Deconstructionism was, and still is, a huge literary and philosophical movement. It has its roots in the philosophy of Heidegger and Nietzsche, and was brought into prominence by the French philosopher Jacques Derrida in the 1950s. Deconstructionism is impossible to define, but essentially it's the rewriting of narratives in such a way that the assumptions hidden in the text are broken out. Metaphysical assumptions about what's real, about what's important. Assumptions, for example, that something meaningful is better than something that's not meaningful. That the identity of things is more important than the difference between things. Assumptions that the narrative actually tells the story. Assumptions so basic to a culture's thought and language that we can hardly question them without destroying the very narrative we're trying to write. Assumptions that seem to be the hidden other in any narrative. A deconstructionist would take the analyst's dream interpretation and would deconstruct it using concepts so strange they sound like they come from quantum mechanics. Here are some possible deconstructionist notes on the analyst's dream narrative. Note 1. Différence. In your analysis you say this is this and this is that. Your bias is towards what is, identity. If you drop your assumption that identity is important, you might look at différence, the non-coincidence of meaning. Explain why the différence between the men and the women is undefined and unresolved. Explain the différence between the men kissing and the man touching. Without the focus on différence, the text is one-dimensional. Note 2. Trace. Trace of absent meanings invisibly pervade the dream narrative as silent echoes, echoes of hidden meanings. Trace of clothing, texture, location, expression, memories. Seeking them out is critical. Yes, of course, an infinite task, but necessary to the meaning of the story. Note 3. Supplément. You must consider completion and incompletion as equal possibilities. When something is complete, why add anything to it? Any addition means we are looking at things from a new perspective. The stage and the characters have changed. The caress on the cheek is an unneeded supplément to the already complete kiss. So there's a radical shift in perspective going on that is not explained by the narrative. An entire chapter is missing. If these notes are almost incomprehensible, it's because they're analyzing the narrative in a strange way. The aim of deconstructionism is not to criticize or discredit a narrative. It's the attempt to do through deconstruction what an analyst does through dream analysis. Shake out hidden elements in a story so we can see how much more is going on than the narrative alone would suggest. To show us that when we create meaning, we lay a quilt of assumptions on a story and say, there's the meaning. The deconstructionists like to pull off the quilt and say, Voilà, this is your quilt, madame, monsieur, and over there, that is the empty bed. Why do deconstructionists deconstruct? Why do analysts analyze? Why do dreamers dream? Why do detectives take notes? Why do we tell stories at all? Why don't we just watch the women leave and the men kiss and enjoy being alive? So why don't we all just hum and clap and kiss and walk away? Why do we have to make up stories about everything? Why do we need to tell stories to our kids, to our lovers, to our friends, to our therapist, to ourselves? Especially when the stories are half wrong, half obscure, half understood, half invented, and 2/3 left out. Where did we get the idea that our life has a story, that our life has meaning? This is just an assumption, a Western industrialized cultural assumption that deconstructionists would be quick to point out. When and why did some humans decide life had meaning? A partial answer comes from language itself, which demands to be spoken, written, passed on. When humans invented writing, they were able to record reality, not just hum and clap and watch it go by. But in writing things down, humans lost something. They lost the ability to perceive through their feelings, to remember through smelling, to know by hearing, to associate by looking, to be part of every event. The act of writing amputates memory and perception. Marshall McLuhan said that in extending our perceptions, media amputate our perceptions. But it's not just McLuhan. Listen to this fragment from Plato's Phaedrus, written in 350 BC, when writing was still new and taking over the old oral Greek culture. This is Socrates talking. This discovery of yours will create forgetfulness in the learners' souls, because they will not use their memories. They will trust to the external written characters and not remember of themselves. They will be tiresome company, having the show of wisdom without the reality. Those of us who use Palm Pilots can attest to the increased amputation of our memories. The Weather Channel has caused us to forget the sky. Computers have amputated our handwriting. Cars have amputated our legs. But back to writing. Writing introduced the story. Along with the story came plot, characters, motives, and meaning. All of us over 30 are holdovers of print culture and probably believe that our lives should have meaning. Those of us under 30 are much more likely to just hum and clap and kiss and walk away. Why? Because electronic culture is displacing print culture. Electronic culture is the eternal present, the here and now. TV is fragmented and amputates our sense of self-reference, erases our identity. We have no history watching TV. We can spend 2 hours changing channels every 30 seconds, being entertained moment by moment. There is no continuity, no history, no story, no context, no meaning. Kids are brought up on this. Imagine a game show. It's called Deconstruction Challenge. The moderator is very excited as he brings in the first contestants. Let's watch. Here's our first group of contestants, 2 men and 2 women. We're going to give them a question they have to answer for today's grand prize. Ready? What's the mysterious other that's not referenced in any narrative? The 2 men and the 2 women huddle, frowning. The clock is ticking. They seem unable to come up with an answer. Time's up! Having failed, the women leave the stage. But the 2 men hesitate and stand there facing each other. They seem despaired at having lost. The camera zooms in on them. One leans over and kisses the other. We can see a tear glint in his eye. The game show host walks over to them, touches one on the shoulder, the other on the cheek, and escorts them off stage. 2 minutes have elapsed. A commercial's coming. Time to switch channels. If life has no meaning anymore, as the grown-ups among us would likely affirm, then maybe life is just some kind of strange and marvelous performance. McLuhan said that all art and all language are just techniques for looking at one situation through another one. All language is metaphor. All art is figurative. Humans seem to like experiencing situations, then looking at them again through some other technique. Poetry, stories, paintings, sculpture, dance, theater, rituals, dreams, talk shows. The idea that language is superior to firewalking is a Western industrial cultural assumption. As a medium, as a pure medium, language is just one child of the mysterious other. The more media we create, the more mediated our experiences become, and the more we amputate our natural sensibilities. As McLuhan said, the printed page rendered gestures, expressions, the language of the face, illegible, and has led us to assume that dialogue is the only way to communicate our spiritual states. If all media amputate, then perhaps silence regenerates. Silence is, according to some, a pre-existing space. While speech tries to eliminate mysteries, silence deepens them. The unspoken other, in our stories, is the silence of the mystery of life itself. The Welsh poet Dylan Thomas said that the silent spaces between and behind words is where the magic lies, where the mysterious other is waiting to emerge. You can tear a poem apart to see what makes it tick. You're back with the mystery of having been moved by words. The best craftsmanship always leaves holes and gaps, so that something that is not in the poem can creep, crawl, flash, or thunder in. Artists look to silence as the cool, dark place that generates the seeds of their creation. With the increasing noise of electronic media, the path to silence is becoming ever more difficult. But if electronic media are a noisy curse, they may also turn out to be a blessing. They're making our narratives shorter and less coherent. New media mingle words, images, and sounds, bringing texture back into the play of the senses. And now we're learning that our narratives are no longer sacred. They can be reframed to suit the audience, to suit the moment, to bring out the emotional response we want. In the story we're telling right now, we've reframed the narrative as a detective story, a dream, and a game show. Our daily narratives are the same. We can reframe them as we like, telling different variations of the truth. Each variation closing some doors and opening others. Our stories have become situational fragments of a play, ungrounded simulacra looking for meaning. And if new media are a blessing, this may bring us closer to poetry. The real aim of the poet, the therapist, the dreamer, the detective, of all of us, is to look for the holes in the narratives, to feel the mystery leaking out, and to respond to that mystery. Let's have one last look at our little story, this time letting the gaps and the silences be heard. 3 men and 2 women are standing on a street. The scene is strangely quiet. The men and women are talking, their lips are moving, but we can hear nothing. From the expression on their faces, we see that words are failing them. Whatever they want to come to through their dialogue is avoiding them. The more they talk, the worse it gets. Then, finally, the women decide to leave, and the 3 men stand quietly by themselves. 2 of the men walk a few steps into a laneway, facing each other, looking into each other's eyes. They say nothing, but their gaze is intense, their bodies feeling the impact of something. In this potent silence, a meaning passes between them. The man by the wall closes his eyes and holds his breath as though in pain. A tear forms in his eye. The other man leans over and gently kisses him. Then the 3rd man appears, saying nothing, silently interrupting their meditation. The kissing man slumps down, hiding his face, moving into himself, taking the moment and his feelings with him. Then he feels the gentle touch of the 3rd man as he passes. Perhaps, after all, the meaning of this little story lies more in the silences than in the words. We will never know what the group was discussing, but it hardly matters. We will never know where the women went or why, or what the 2 men saw in each other's faces, or what the meaning of the silent kiss was. We will never know why the 3rd man decided to caress them, or what they felt when he did. It's also likely that none of the women or men really know either, although each might be able to tell a story about it. But perhaps they will choose not to, and remain in the silence of not knowing, where their souls and our souls can plant seeds, seeds that will grow as they're nourished in the silent darkness of the other. So our story of a story comes to an end, with no real sign of the mysterious other. But there are gaps in this story, and maybe you've felt a bit of the mysterious other leaking out here and there. What we know as human beings is that in life we perceive, we feel, and we respond. And like the 3rd man, if we're touched, if we're moved, we have the choice of touching back or not. Touching through our skin, through speech, through a letter, through a tango, through a video, through whatever means our souls are capable. This is the dance, and there is only the dance.